Hi, welcome to my blog. My name is Tom Shu, and today we're going to be doing a retouching video. And in this video, it's basically a member requested retouch, and the reason why we're doing this retouch is a member named Johan Bierwerts, I believe he's from Belgium, contacted me and asked me about some content that we had up. I had a blog post called an invited retouch, and what it was a person that offered an image for retouching, and then when she saw it online she got a little bit scared and thought that too many people would see the video, and she just kind of freaked out. So we just went ahead and took that down, and he didn't get a chance to fully go over all the content, so I offered to do a retouching video for him, and he supplied an image of his girlfriend. So now we have an image that we can do a retouch. But when I first look at this image, I see that it's a little underexposed. You know, exposure is very subjective, but if you look at the histogram, you'll see over here that 50% is right in the middle, and that's kind of like where the 18% gray is. So there's not a lot of information to the right. And I'm not saying that, you know, this information isn't where it should be, but if we hover this cursor over on the diffuse value, like on the cheek, where it's properly exposed, you can see that she is a Caucasian skinned person, and we have red, green, and blue values of 50.3, 36.2, and 30.1. Well, if we pull up a reference image that I have here, I have a whole bunch of things in here to evaluate a print. However, I can also use it to evaluate exposure, especially on skin tones. In this area right here, we have a bunch of different skin tones. You know, we have a like olive and a light and a dark and kind of a medium skin tones. So if we look at the Caucasian, you can see between the olive and the really light skinned that her skin is going to fall somewhere between here and here. So if we look here and see that the RGB values are 89, 87, or 89, 77, and 70, where this one here is 88, 70, and 60 roughly. So you can see that in the red tones, because Caucasian has a lot of magenta or reds in the skin, that value is going to be the highest of all. We got 87 and 88. So if I look at her image, she's also a Caucasian, and her value is around 58, that's pretty low. So let's get started with exposure. So this tutorial is probably going to be broken up into several different parts. This first part is going to be probably just on exposure. So looking at this image, I like to always set a black point first, a black point and a white point. Since there isn't a lot of white information in this scene, we're not really going to have a bright white point, because if we did, we'd blow it out, and I'd show you what I mean. In Lightroom, which I always use to do all of my editing and cataloging of all my files, I always start here with the basic exposures. I also consider when I'm doing a retouch, what is the retouch for? Is it a high fashion? Is it a simple portrait? Is it like a corporate? Is it a senior portrait? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to make somebody look glamorous? Or are we trying to just do a conservative retouch for a portrait? And in this case, it looks like we're just doing a standard portrait. You can see that he had a backlight going on over here for a hair light, and his main light came from up high, so the catch lights are pretty close where they need to be, so his main light came from this area. Okay, and he could have turned her a little bit more, but you know, this isn't posing, this is just retouching. That's just what I see when I look at the image. So it looks like he has two lights and maybe a reflector. Here we go. With exposure, we'll start with the black point. Remember, we don't have a white point in here, and if we try to shove a white point in, it's going to blow out all the detail in the skin. So if you hold down the Alt key, and that's Option key on a Mac, we'll start with the blacks. Okay, there's no information being clipped at all, and since he's underexposed, that you see at plus 17, he starts to clip information. He starts to lose detail in that blue channel. There's blues, and he's starting to lose information in the red channels and the cyan. So if we keep going down a little bit at minus 10, you notice that there's solid blacks in that hair. So if we brought the exposure up, this is the exposure. I just consider this the brightness control. Now if you look at the black point, we didn't clip it yet. So if I just set the black on 0, you see that there's still some clipping going on in there. So it's definitely telling me it's underexposed. So let's go ahead and set a black point, and then we'll use the exposure as an overall brightness control at the end. Black, we'll bring it down till we just get a little bit of clip in the black. Just right there. And the whites, we can bring it really far over and we're not going to clip anything because there's nothing white in the image. You can see we just got a dot at the bottom right here in the scarf. And you can see that that image, it just looks kind of strange. We've blown a lot of the detail out because we shoved that white point over. All this white point information is coming from the highlights on the skin from the main light. Okay, so we can see that he used a square softbox, or sorry, a rectangular softbox. And there appears to be another light source here. So this could be the reflector, or this could be another small light up front for the shadow side of the face. Not sure what his setup is, but I'm guessing he had like a 4-foot softbox and another fill card or another small softbox for a fill light. So he may have 2 in the front and then he had a hair light in the back. Alright. So we know we've gone too far on the whites. If we hold down the Alt key, you can see that there's no clipping information there, so we can adjust these whites down till we don't blow any of that highlight information on the skin away. So all of the details in the pores of her skin still, so that's good. We look on her cheek, everything looks pretty good. Alright, so now we're going to look at the highlights and shadows. Do the same thing, we're going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and I'm just going to bring these shadows up until we lose any information clipping in those channels. Okay, so that looks pretty good there in the shadows. And in the highlights, we're going to do the same. Make sure we're not going to clip anything. Hold the Alt. If we drag it down, we push it to the right, see there's it starts to clip. So we can just use this kind of to taste a little bit on the highlights. So I'm going to just zero those out. Now we can use this exposure. If I just come up here, I can push this exposure over as a brightness control, just enough to where, you see if I bring it down, I control those highlights completely. Double click on exposure, brings it to 0. I can increase exposure a little bit while I still retain detail in the face. So this looks like a pretty good exposure. So now let's hover and read what the histogram says on our cheek value. Okay, over here on the cheek we're at 76, 58, and 51. Over on the forehead we're in 82, so that's a little bit hot up there, but I'm more concerned with the cheek value or the chin value. So we're at 76, 56, and 56. I'm going to call this as pretty good exposure for now, and we'll reset it. This is before, and this is after. Next thing I'm going to do, which I like to do to all of the images I do for portrait work, is I'm going to add just a little bit of clarity around 4 or 5. Okay, and then I'm going to add a little bit of vibrance, somewhere around 10 to 12. It just gives a little bit of punch in Caucasian skin tones, those reds. Okay, so let's look at this again. Okay, maybe we could kick up those highlights just a little bit more. So I'm going to kick up the exposure just a hair. Maybe go to 6, 3, 6. Okay, we still got information in the forehead there, and if we look over there, we're at around 80 where those other images were. So if we go back and look at these skin tones, you can see that that's like 77, 79, 87, 86, 81. So this is right around 80, 78 to 80. Ooh, pulled up the wrong one. Let's take a peek back here, and this is at our image. And we're right at 75, 77. So it's saying we could go a little bit more, somewhere around this area. That's about 80. Let's look and make sure we still got information in the pores. Main thing is I don't want that specular highlight, that white area in the forehead, to blow out the pore detail. Okay. So there we have a proper exposure. So I'm going to call this done on part 1, and we'll call this part 1 exposure. I want to thank you all for taking time to visit my blog today, and until next time, we'll see you soon.